Everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bunker Office Hours, a weekly live show brought to you by a team at Bunker Labs, national network of veteran and military spouse entrepreneurs dedicated to helping grow our ecosystem. I'm your host, the one and only IRON Mike Steadman, coming to you from the beautiful city, of Newark, New Jersey, joined by my co-host, Amy Morton, and our special guest today, Devin Sizer. Devin, did I get your last name right?
Yep, that's right.
We're going to be talking about nonprofit financial management and setting yourself up for success because, Devin's been part of Bunker Labs team from the very beginning. She and I are kindred spirits because, she brings this wealth of knowledge and experience on nonprofit strategy and operations. And on the other side of the house, me here in Newark, many of you know me for Ironbound Boxing, which is very grassroots. But I told Devin before we went live, I know how to stay alive. So COVID was a real test, and I'm really excited to get into that because I do feel like the community constantly reaches out to me about wanting to start a nonprofit organization, what advice that they have. And so I think it'll be great for Devin and I to peel back the curtain a little bit about, what it takes to actually run one. So before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Amy to talk about any updates that are taking place in the bunker, particularly these showcases.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Yes, so that's the first thing on my list is we've got this week, Veterans and Residents Showcase events happening all across the country all week long, and then a couple next week, little stragglers at the end. So you can check that out at bunkerlabs.org/veteran-showcase, and then find an event near you, or you can come to our virtual event. We have one of those. Also happening this week, not this week, but this month, USAA pitch competition applications are open through, I think that's through June 30th. So you can check that out, bunkerlabs.org/USAA-pitch. And then CEO Circle applications are open also through June. So that is for not early stage, but like larger stage businesses who can join our CEO Circle program. That is a 1-year program. And the apps are available at bunkerlabs.org/CEO-circle. And then finally, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Month. So we are highlighting CEO Circle alumni and Air Force veteran Marley Anders. So you can check that out on our blog. That is, the link will be in the link is long. So I will put the link in the comments and y'all can check it out. And that is what's happening this week.
Awesome. Make sure you guys get out to those showcases. Great way to engage the community. Additionally, I'm really excited about the CEO Circle flying that's taking place in June. I'll be headed out there. I'll be going live for office hours. I'm going to get some good interviews. So getting out into the ecosystem to capture some of these inspiring stories. So again, make sure you're paying attention to not only office hours and updates that Amy's sharing, but just keep following the Bunker Lab socials because we put out a lot of information about our various different programs. So without further ado, Devin, welcome to Office Hours.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, one of the things I do think that makes Bunker special is not only do we have veterans on the staff side of the house, we also have a lot of civilians as well that bring so much subject matter expertise. And again, you've been with Bunker from, the very early grassroots days to scaling up into this, real national organization with chapters all across, I don't want to say chapters, let me phrase that, serving veterans and military spouses, all across the country. And so real briefly, could you bring people up to speed on who you are and your experience thus far with Bunker?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Yes, so I have been fortunate enough to be with the Bunker Labs team since 2015, just shortly after the organization was founded. I actually initially got connected with the organization because I had previously worked with our founder, Todd Connor, through a fellowship program for young professionals who are interested in the nonprofit sector. And so having been with the organization since 2015, I have been fortunate to wear, I would say, just about every hat except program delivery. There's lots of amazing members of the Bunker team who do that. And I am one of those people who loves keeping the trains running on time, getting all the systems and support mechanisms set up. So I've done a little bit of everything to support the organization, helping run events, helping run day-to-day office operations. Over time, I got more specialized and was doing more fundraising work for the organization. And that all eventually led to me really discovering how much I loved some of the back office operations stuff, specifically around stuff like financial management, board strategy, etc. And one thing I'll say off the top is I think there's sometimes a conception that you really need like a degree in nonprofit management or like a really specific educational background. But we on the Bunker team are very much self-taught on a lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of great resources and a lot of great support for the nonprofit sector that is out there to help you figure out how to make it work.
So Devin, we got a problem in this military connected community. We love to start nonprofits, right? Particularly veterans serving veterans. Now, I'm not in that class. I run Ironbound Boxing and I serve the local community here in Newark, but I feel like I see it over and over again, right? People identify a problem that they want to solve. There's a social component. And the first instinct is, I want to start a nonprofit. Why is that not always the best case?
Yeah, I think I used to have a joke with Todd back in the day that like we were going to set up some sort of module online associated with Bunker Lab for people who wanted to start a nonprofit. Then the first screen was going to just say, "Are you sure? Maybe don't." Yeah. There are, yeah, exactly. Everybody in this community is so cause driven. However, there are so many complexities to managing a nonprofit, even a relatively small one, so many requirements around operations, financials, reporting, etc. And every new nonprofit that is started is also then sort of fracturing the space further. And of course, that's not to say that nobody should start nonprofits, otherwise we wouldn't have Bunker Labs. But there's a balance to be had between a need that's not being served for some reason versus a need that maybe a well-intentioned person could serve by contributing their time and treasure to another nonprofit. Because actually, lots of nonprofits could use volunteers, they could use board members, which is a volunteer position. And there's a lot of other opportunities to support cause-driven work without taking on all of the burdens of running a 501c3.
Yeah, I think the first thing is people assume that it's so much easier just getting donations, right? You can just, instead of coming up with a product or service that you're charging people for, you say, hey, have this great program we want to start. We're going to serve the kids. It's going to be easy to set up and get donations for. But man, it's a venture just like anything else. And it's hard because you're not selling that physical good. And even if you do get a few donations early on to make it sustainable, right? That's the real grind. And I think it's misleading for a lot of people because when they start, they assume that they're going to get funded by grants. They're going to get funded by these corporate entities. But I don't know how it was when guys were first starting Bunker, but here locally in Newark, they call them the anchor institutions, right? And these are your traditional boys and girls club or whatever. If you're not an anchor, really, the large corporations weren't even looking at you. And so that was really hard those first few years of just staying alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Early years, you are faced with, challenges in terms of like getting your 501c3. I know for the Bunker that took about a year to get that through. And that's not long relative to other organizations. You're trying to get set up. You're trying to produce your first financial statements. There are a lot of corporate and foundation grantors who will not look at you until you're 3 years in, 5 years in, of a certain scale of sophistication in other regards. Some that won't look at you until you do an audit, which is usually something that you're not doing until you have a couple of $100,000 of revenue. So it really depends. And yeah, to your point, rather than selling a physical product, by starting a nonprofit, you're saying, I'm going to take on parallel sales processes. I am going to run two separate, if related, sales processes. One where I am marketing and providing a product at no or low cost to our program participants, clients, service recipients, etc. And on a parallel track, I am going to market and sell a product, which is impact for the community, to any number of donors, partners, etc., each of which is slightly interested in a slightly different set of features of that product, how they want their impact to work, what parts of the impact they're most interested in. And they're also interested in seeing different things in exchange for the product you're selling them. They're interested in different impact data. They're interested in different ways of being involved in your organization. So yeah, actually you are taking on running 2 different sales processes, both of which require a very different set of skills.
So let's start with the financial management aspect of it. One of the things that you talked about early on was getting the 501c3 status. A lot of times people say, I want to start a nonprofit. What do? Then they say, I need to get 501c3 set up. I need to get a board. They start recruiting people for their board. Talk to us through what you recommend the process is for people.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you raised the point of the board, because I think that can be an excellent place to start. I mean, pretty much as soon as you have a sort of mission vision in mind for your organization, I would start looking around for, a handful, a half dozen individuals who can be good initial board members. And that is partially because you're going to need them for a bunch of filings and stuff, but it's also partially because they can be initial validators as you're trying to recruit further support, and they can help you figure these things out. Like in your initial board and going forward, you always want one lawyer. You probably always want one person who has relatively high financial experience, etc. So they are your first volunteers. And in that early stage with your board, you are going to be looking for people who are wanting to volunteer. They're not wanting to just be figurehead board members. And then, yeah, I mean, you're going to need incorporation, basic plan for the organization, etc. And then the actual filing for the 501c3, that is where you're looking to share some of those initial documents in the IRS required information, along with demonstrating that you plan to have what qualifies as a charitable purpose in the IRS's eyes.
So I got a cheat code for filing that 501c3. So at a lot of universities, state schools across the country that have a law school, they have what's called transactional lawyering clinics. And so these programs are third-year law students that are gaining experience. And a lot of time, the universities will, I'm going to use military lingo, fap them out to work with local organizations, etc. I literally pay $25 and work with the Rutgers Newark Transactional Lawyering Clinic, and they helped me get my 501c3 status filed. And I met with them multiple times. So there are opportunities in the local community, so people don't have to do this alone. So I try to encourage people to take advantage of these state schools, community colleges, etc., to see, hey, where can you get the nonprofit support? Another question I want to ask you, though, if I'm not mistaken, right, you can file for the big nonprofit, right? So you're saying you're going to have over $100,000 a year in donations, etc. But if you are less than $50,000 early on, you can file for the nonprofit easy, I believe. It's like a
right. So there isn't a differentiation in terms of the 501c3 status that you will receive from the IRS. That's either you are or you aren't. However, when it comes to the required annual filings, depending on your your size of the organization in terms of finances, you may be required to do something as small as the 990 easy, or people call it like the 990 postcard, up to the full 990. And the 990 is the nonprofit sector equivalent of your annual tax return, except it's actually an information return, because nonprofits are not paying income tax.
So once you do get that status, what are some of the requirements people need to think about in order to maintain that status?
Yes. Filing the 990 is absolutely one, and that is not a super small lift. It's also a little different than what people might be familiar with in the for-profit sector, because there's more sort of qualitative questions about how the organization is run, governed, asking as well for disclosures around compensation of key employees, disclosures around the amount of money that was spent on programs, fundraising, etc. So it can take a while to prepare. And the other big thing that I will say right off the bat with running a 501c3 is probably one of the most common ways that people lose that status is lobbying. Now, nonprofits are allowed to do advocacy, but not lobbying. And there's entire courses you can take about what's the difference between the two of them. If I had to boil it down to one sentence, it would be, are you raising awareness about an issue versus trying to convince somebody about a specific bill or a specific candidate? But that is not legal advice. Definitely look into the matter further. So that's a big factor as well, is to be aware of that.
Now we got a lot of people tuning in on live. So if you all have questions for Devin and I around, nonprofit management, financials, etc., the tax exempt status we're talking about, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat. At this point, Devin is an SME, even though she came from a history background, to be part of an organization as it professionalizes has to be super valuable for you, just seeing the other side of this, because a lot of organizations, some just kind of stay where they are. They haven't made it to the professionalization level to where even they're able to pay themselves a salary, but also bring on additional staff. David G. Hansen says, looking at 990s can give you a good idea of what you need to do as a nonprofit. Now, Devin, I want you to let me know if this is good or bad advice. One of the things I tell people early on is, before you jump headfirst into starting your nonprofit, see if you can find a fiscal sponsor, because that will be a great way for you to kind of validate your program idea, get some traction, show what's possible, and then learn, because there's a lot of unknowns early on. You figure out what you don't know. And then after you get that fiscal sponsor and you get your program some traction, then it might make sense to actually branch out and apply for your own 501c3 status. And so curious to hear your feedback on that.
Yes. Well, Bunker Lab certainly thought it was a good idea, because that's how we got started. Our first year, we had a year and change, something like that. We had a fiscal sponsor, which is a workforce development nonprofit in Chicago that had a portion of their work was specifically around the veteran community. So there was that connectivity. One thing I'll say is, even if you have a fiscal sponsor, you can still be applying for the 501c3 at the same time. Like, I think Bunker applied for theirs almost immediately, but having the fiscal sponsor gave us the ability to have money flowing as we needed it to, and to receive 501c3 donations through the fiscal sponsor in the meantime. You're absolutely correct as well about it being a validator for your organization. I think it does depend a little bit on your strategic vision for the organization in the first couple of years, because the Bunker was founded with the understanding and the intention that we were going to want to incur a significant amount of expenses in terms of personnel and other expenses that are involved in delivering our programs. And so we knew that we were going to need funding from institutions, and that was going to have to flow through a fiscal sponsor. If you were starting a small nonprofit where you envisioned that yourself and a volunteer board and a broader group of volunteers were going to be executing work where there was not going to be a huge amount of cash flows, I don't know that you necessarily need to get into the fiscal sponsorship, because that is also a lift to find the right organization and arrange it.
I just recommend it. Just look for synergies, because it's a great way to get started. Because the thing is, we get all energized, we're ready to go, ready to get after it. And then you get caught up in the drag of the paperwork and all this other stuff. And it gets you further and further away from why you came up with this program idea in the first place. So I just say that from a way to let people gain momentum and, get some traction. All right, we got some questions coming in. They're putting us on the spot here, Devin. Crystal says, what about benefit corporations? What are your thoughts on those?
So Mike, I might hand that one over to you, because that is not an area of my expertise.
So one of the things I took was a social impact class at Rutgers. I finessed it in my master's program, because I get my master's in American Studies. But I said, hey, I just started this nonprofit and I had this requirement. I was like, can I take this, social entrepreneurship class? Amazing. And in that class, they interest to the benefit corporation. All right. And so there's two things there, Crystal. One is you can register your organization as like a public benefit corporation, no different than registering as like a LLC. It's actually a thing. But the thing that actually matters for most people is the B Corp certification. So this is like a third-party certification that you go to that announces to the world that, hey, you're a certified B Corp. And it's funny, when I first got into this space, I spent a lot of time learning about B Corps and all that other stuff. But then, once I quit my job and went all in, I was just focused head down of like, how do I maintain this organization? How do I raise funds? And then also when COVID happened, I think a lot of people went internal. And I say that to say, like, there's all these different kind of opportunities out there, whether it's a B Corp, but what I have found is that benefit corporations, more for like a for-profit entity, that you want to show the world that, hey, you're doing good, but you do well while doing good at the same time. So think of your Warby Parkers of the world. I believe Warby Parker is a B Corp. You see this a lot more in the legitimate social enterprises, i.e. a for-profit component. So I would say do some more research on that. But what I'm getting at is don't be distracted by it. Yeah, right. And David J. Hansen says Benefit Corp is a legal organization that protects corporations' ability to focus on public benefit rather than just profit. Absolutely. And I think it matters more at like a higher level too, where you're starting to bring in real revenue. You have that board. And now instead of saying, hey, we have this obligation purely to shareholders, it's like, hey, we have this obligation to social, environmental, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a crash course on it, but there is a lot more information out there that I would check out.
Yeah, and now that you're saying that, Mike, I'm also thinking about the fact that like you do often see it with companies that are providing like a direct to consumer, like product sales, et cetera. And one difference, like for example, why Bunker Labs, that wouldn't be a good model for us, is that we never foresaw that we were going to bring in a significant amount of revenue through our products or services. We were always operating from the model of wanting to offer programming, courses, resources at little to no cost. And under that circumstance, we needed to be getting revenue from other places. And that's where having a 501c3 allows us to get grants from corporate foundations, private foundations, government grants, et cetera. Under most of those things, for-profits are not eligible.
David Hansen, appreciate you, David, by the way. He also says, what do you think about alternatives to 501c3, such as the LCCC? I don't know if you're familiar with LCCC, Devin.
I am not. I really am a nonprofit girl at heart, so I'm afraid I'm not as familiar with the alternatives.
Devin, you want to educate? I mean, sorry, not Devin. David, you want to share some light on it? Now I'm familiar with the LCCC because in that class, we looked at all the different opportunities. But this is what I will tell you. When I went to my advisors, when I went to my mentors, they said, don't make it harder for yourself, right? That's at the end of the day because, there's a lot of different formations out there available. But one of the things that it brought back to was sometimes not everyone is going to be familiar with those as well. So when you tell people that you're LCCC or you're a benefit corporation, now that's going to be a new level of you requiring to educate them about like what that actually means early on. And so I've just been head down on 501c3 chopping away. But I remember early on, before I was jaded by the social impact movement. And the only reason I got jaded because it's hard and ain't nobody coming to save you. That's the reality of it. When COVID hit and all of us were head down, trying to stay alive, right? It was a grind. And so I remember coming into the space, I was very rose-eyed. Is that the term? Is it rosy-eyed? Is that the term? I might be butchered. I'm a Marine, y'all. I apologize. And I'm a boxer. But yeah, man, I used to go be looking at all the social impact magazines, looking at all the different business models and stuff. Now I just focus on the fundamentals, head down, fundamentals, driving donations and driving sales of my for-profit business to allow me to create more margin for myself that allows me to be a little bit more radically generous with my time and revenue.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of great things that folks can read and listen to about the nonprofit industrial complex. And ultimately, if you're trying to work in this sector, you're working within a limiting, challenging, purposefully bureaucratic system. And so it's always a matter of trying to balance how much, just doing the best you can within that very complicated environment.
Yeah. And David says he's not an expert, but bringing it back to the LCCC, he says LCCC is a low-profile LLC. It's not a nonprofit, but counts as such for institutional investments to meet their social impact percentage. By the way, he's not an expert on this, but he's sharing. We appreciate you nonetheless, David. All right, we only got a little bit of time left. Devin, I'm going to transition to book recommendations. Do you have a book rec for our audience as I run and grab one myself?
Yes. I was chatting with Amy before and was saying, can I give an alternative to a book rec, which is a website rec, which is the Council of Nonprofits website. That site is an amazing resource. To the extent that Bunker Labs where it is today, I have to give some shout outs to that website. They are a nonprofit that aggregates nonprofit resources across all kinds of topics. You go to any different topics, such as your tax exempt status, your annual filings, etc., and they will have links to all kinds of high quality resources that you can use right there. So whenever there's a question that comes up at the Bunker, that's usually my first stop is to take a look at that.
And what site is that?
The Council of Nonprofits.
Got it. I'm taking a note on that. And here locally in New York City, there was the nonprofit center. I forgot it. The Foundation Center, I believe it's called. And they have a lot of research and all that stuff on nonprofits. And I used to go there and actually take a lot of their classes locally until I started to get a little traction and was head down. So that was back in the I Believe day, right? Mm-hmm. When I only had about $100. But then you get in the grind of having to maintain and you get caught up in the day to day. And so it gets harder and harder to go to those classes and stuff. Now, I got 2 books. I'm putting Amy on the spot. The first one is Organize Tomorrow Today, 8 Ways to Retrain Your Mind and Optimize Your Performance at Work and in Life by Dr. Jason Selk and Taryn Botlow. I read this book a few years ago, but I'm having to come back to it because, you know, on any given day, you get bombarded with so much stuff that has to get done, and it can make you feel a little bit overwhelmed instead of just going back to the fundamentals of like, hey, what are my 3 most important things I want to get accomplished tomorrow? What's the one must that has to get done? And if I don't get anything else done and I get these, I'm an effective executive. And I have to always remind myself that with whether it's nonprofit, doing a grant app for Ironbound Boxing or applying for a fellowship or something, and same thing with Ironbound Media. But for you nonprofit out there, remember we were talking about the LCCCs, the public benefit corps, all the different business model. Check out this book, Social Startup Success, How the Best Nonprofits Launch, Scale Up, and Make a Difference with Kathleen Kelly Janis. And this was a book I read early on, like literally in the foundational days of Ironbound Boxing. And honestly, I should probably revisit it because one of the things Devin and I didn't get to is when you're applying for these grants and these fellowships now, there's a lot of lingo that has changed over the term that people want you to speak to. So they're like, what is your theory of change? And you're like, what the heck is a theory of change? So then you go all the way to learn it and you start talking about it. And then they spin up some new term. What's the new one now? It's not theory of change. It's almost like a canvas or something. You know what I'm talking about, Devin?
I'm still on theory of change. I'm still using that one.
Yeah. But there's a lot of lingo
absolutely.
Specifically to the nonprofit and social impact space. And I think this book will really give you a good foundation. So check it out. As we close out here, Devin, any final words of wisdom for our viewers as they can pursue, their own nonprofit?
Actually, we did have one last question here that I was intrigued to answer, which is, I think this one came in anonymously, but is saying, can't you help more people by being a good capitalist versus a good nonprofiteer? Which, yes, age-old question. I think I have to go back to saying, like the system of capitalism more broadly has decided that it prefers, or, the way our society is structured has decided it wants to have nonprofits as a way for capitalists to make an impact. And so to the extent that those organizations exist, I think it's important to have people who are a good fit for that work in those roles. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a person who loves all the stuff that most people don't like about nonprofits, like spreadsheets and grant applications and the technicalities of the 990. So I think it depends on what drives you personally, what things are interesting to you, and how much the downsides of running a nonprofit are going to impact you.
What I'm going to do is I'm putting Devin on the spot here. I'm going to get her on the Transition podcast. We're going to go a deep dive on nonprofits because I actually talked to her about this before. I think at one of the fly-ins a few years ago, but I feel like we're getting a lot of engagement on this, just having you on here. So there's a lot of questions that got to be answered. But here's what I will say about what you just said. At the end of the day, right, you also have to be realistic about how much time you can dedicate to whatever you're doing. And the thing is, there's certain nonprofit. It is not sexy, y'all. I just want you to know. It sounds good when you first started up, shaking hands and kissing babies, but a year goes by, 2 years, 5 years, right? And that's if you're not even paying yourself a salary out of it. So these are all real things just to think about. And I'll do a deeper dive on that on the podcast. But I appreciate you giving us your time today. For all our viewers, do me a favor. Make sure you subscribe to the Transition Podcast. If you haven't done so already, got a lot of great content. And again, I'm going to invite Devin on to talk some more about this as well. And I also like to acknowledge our sponsors for the Transition Podcast, MetLife Foundation, for making it possible. So until next week, everyone, peace, love, and have a great rest of your week.